Now, think what happens if you have $100,000 in the bank and the purchasing power of that $100,000 declines by $4,500 a year after 10 years. What it means is that half of your purchasing power went to money heaven, pre-tax.
Hi, I'm Ken Lewis here, CEO of APMEX Inc., and here today with me is Rick Rule from Sprott Inc. Rick, welcome to having you.
Pleasure, thank you.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about why investors invest in gold. So Rick, I've got twin boys. They're about to graduate college here soon. Naturally, I like to give my kids advice on investments, to think about it at a young age. Is there anything you would share with my children as they start out in the professional world and how to think about retirement planning and thinking about it early?
I've thought about this a lot. I do, as you may know, a lot of youth mentoring. It's one of my philanthropic activities. And separate and apart from that, obviously the millennials are the future of our business. Talking to the millennials, I think, is important. You know, your kids grew up in one of the most benign investment climates on the planet.
That's a good point.
The market went up, interest rates went down, property went up. If you basically were able to walk and chew gum and stayed in the market, you did okay. Mm-hmm. But my suspicion is that the future, while still bright, is going to be somewhat less benign. And I think, unfortunately, what you and I, more my generation than your generation, has done to our kids is substantially less benign. Well, the kids react to narrative. We have to teach them some arithmetic. And the arithmetic goes like this. At the federal level, on balance sheet, our obligations exceed $22 trillion. Off balance sheet, by the way, off balance sheet obligations, your viewers are looking at them. I'm 67 years old. Medicare, Medicaid,
right.
All these things. Those liabilities are $100 trillion. Now, when I say trillion to audiences, their eyes glaze over. They don't know what a trillion is. It's a boring concept because they can't recognize it. Well, it's 12 zeros to begin with. Yeah. The point of all this is that federally, we owe each other $120 trillion. That's the debt. How are we going to pay the debt off? Well, this is another problem. The budget, or national income, taxes and fees less expenses, are $1 trillion a year upside down, right. Meaning that we aren't paying it down, we're actually building the debt up. Young people need to think this. How do you add a column of negative numbers and come up with a positive sum? And they need to understand that while we're leaving them, in many ways, a good world, the other thing that we're leaving them is a $120 trillion bill for benefits that we voted for each other, but we're leaving them the bill. Historically, over time, when societies have become indebted like this, there's two ways out. There's a good, honest default, where the government says to the bondholders, too bad, so sad, we're not going to pay. And where they say, the young generation says to old generation, like me, well, you voted yourself all these benefits, you pay for them. But that isn't what happens politically. Politically, what happens is that you lessen the value of the obligation. In other words, you lessen the net present value of the currency. The reason I say this is not necessarily just to criticize government, but rather to say over 3,000 years, the best form of insurance against the depreciation of a currency by society has been gold. And the need today is as great as it's ever been.
Okay, Rick. Man, time's flown by. I'm getting close to retirement, and naturally, I'm looking at my investments, I'm looking at my assets, and I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing, not only for myself, but for my family long term. And I want to kind of get your thoughts on how you look at that from your perspective. Again,
Ken, it depends on the retiree.
Yeah.
What we find as people age and as their investments become allegedly more conservative, they become much more interest rate sensitive, which means they tend to go to deposit products and they tend to go to bonds. Yeah. And those are precisely the assets that will do very well for you until they don't. Yeah. And during the points in time when they don't, gold again forms a wonderful insurance function. A pure financial planner would probably say that you need less insurance as you age, because you're wealthier and the time that you're trying to defend your purchasing power for decreases. But the truth is that people's psychological need for security increases as they age. And the truth is, and this is personal again, I'm not speaking as Sprott, I'm speaking as Rick Rule. The essence of wealth, Ken, is enhancing your sense of well-being. So when you're talking about an aged person close to retirement, you're looking at one. And the truth is, as I say, physical precious metals and cash, liquidity, help me sleep nights and stay calm, which is important to me.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And, it's one of the things I recently gave a presentation talking about inflation and kind of what it does to the dollar over time. You need to have a natural certain amount set aside for the rainy day. But can you talk a little bit about gold and the dollar and how to think about them in tandem?
I have a great anecdote I'll give that your older viewers will appreciate. When I was a young man building my business and I was on a very, very stringent budget, it's a fancy way of saying I was broke, I had occasion to stay at a well-known lodging establishment nationwide called Motel 6. Most of your viewers will be familiar with Motel 6. It was called Motel 6, Ken, because a room there cost $6 a night. On my way to the office in Carlsbad, California yesterday, I went past a Motel 6 and the sign said Motel 6, $64.99, which is to say Motel 60. Now, there's only two possible explanations for this, Ken. Perhaps you can help me. Either today, a room at Motel 6 is 10 or 11 times as spacious and 10 or 11 times as luxurious. You certainly couldn't tell that from the exterior of a Motel 6. And I will admit I haven't done much recent due diligence. Or the denominator. The purchasing power of the medium of exchange used to purchase a room at Motel 6 has declined by 95% in the last 35 years. Right. The best illustration that I have for Americans of my generation with regards to the purchasing power of gold is my daily trips past Motel 6, an institution that I have firsthand knowledge of. You know, when our government talks to us about the decline in purchasing power of the US dollar, they use a consumer price index. And the consumer price index is a fairly interesting collection of data. In the first instance, whoever compiles the consumer price index doesn't shop where I shop. The other thing about the index, and this is amazing to me, Ken, they don't include tax. Now, my cost of living, in fact, includes tax. So any compilation of my cost of living that doesn't include tax becomes fallacious. They also give me hedonism credits. Now, I really wish I was more hedonist, but it seems to me that they are telling me that my cost of living increases by 1.6% a year. I don't buy much. I'm a cheapskate. And I would say anecdotally that my cost of living ex-tax increases by 4 or 4.5% a year. Now, think what happens if you have $100,000 in the bank and the purchasing power of that $100,000 declines by $4,500 a year after 10 years. What it means is that half of your purchasing power went to money heaven, pre-tax. So let's think about the alternative for savers to gold. The world's benchmark security is the U.S. 10-year Treasury. It's the security that every other security in the world is priced off of. It's denominated in U.S. dollars, which are the reserve currency of the world, the highest and best use of money on the planet. The government tells us right now that they are going to pay us 1.68, I think, as of this filming, for the U.S. 10-year Treasury. That means that you're going to give the U.S. government money, and they're going to give you 1.68% in a currency that they say is depreciating by 1.6%. In other words, they're going to give you 0.8% a year for 10 years. My good friend Jim Grant calls that return-free risk. Return-free risk. It is, in one sense, the most stable investment in the world. If you give them money, this is the only promise our government may ever keep. They absolutely promise to give you back less than you gave them.
Yeah, well, I think that actually makes a great point why you should hold gold as well.
Right.
And I've talked to many a person who talks about holding dollars, and I try to educate them on inflation. I think your overview there is a good one. And
I believe you have to have dollars short term.
Yes.
You have to have short term liquidity. You absolutely positively have to. These ideas,
Sure.
people who want to be only in gold, I think, is making a mistake. But the truth is that most people have no gold whatsoever, and
Right.
most people believe that the U.S. 10-year Treasury is a good investment.
Right. No, I agree 100%. Yeah, that's a good point. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about is where precious metals fits in the fold, right? And you can go out and look at it from a diversification standpoint. You can go out and look at it from interest rates and are they attractive for investments today. You can go out and look at it from concerns about the dollar being printed at all-time high rates. But at the end of the day, it seems like any way you look at it, it seems positive in having some exposure to precious metals in your portfolio any way you slice it.
Well, I think that's accurate, irrespective of your outlook. But I think particularly in the context of people examining the way they feel today, relative, if they're older, to the way they felt in the decade of the 70s, or the way they felt in the tech wreck of 2000, or if they're old enough, how they felt in 2007. During periods of time of instability, during periods of time when your confidence gets challenged, gold traditionally has done very, very well.
Yeah, we were looking at 2007 and 2008 recently and looking what the equities markets did on the pullback and just how well precious metals performed.
Yeah.
And it just reminds you that it acts as a hedge, a natural hedge to equities.
It's important to note that in a very sharp, liquidity-driven decline like 2008, gold sells off too.
Yeah.
Because the liquidation decision isn't made by the investor, it's made by the margin clerk. But it also comes back more quickly. People who were prudent, who went into the circumstance with liquidity, who are looking to park surplus cash into an asset that will sustain and support their purchasing power. During periods of trust, people go into gold. Remember, and I know you remember because you sell it every day, gold is a medium of exchange and a store of value simultaneously. A dollar is a promise to pay. Gold is in fact payment. You don't have to trust anybody because it is payment. It's not a promise to pay. And in the aftermath of liquidity-driven circumstances, demand for gold is very high for just that reason. You don't have to trust anybody.
And do you have any views that the scarcity of gold, that the amount of mining being done in today's world and the availability of gold, when we think about as demand starts to resume itself for gold at levels like we've seen in previous days, what's your view on what that does to the price of gold?
Well, I'm a believer that markets work. I'm a believer that price will take care of scarcity. It might take care of scarcity at a very, very, very different level. If you think about a circumstance, going back to the earlier question, where gold would go from 0.5% of the savings matrix in the United States to 2%, in other words, where you would quadruple demand for gold. The gold will be there. Remember that almost all the gold that's ever been mined is still physical gold. So the gold will be there, but the price might be different. The price denominated in dollars.
Right. Well, it seems like there's a lot of upside on the price is where I was going. Obviously, if demand were to pick up to levels like we've seen in the past, with the amount of individuals out there with dollars to invest, it seems like there's a great opportunity for price appreciation in the gold space over the long term.
That's what I think investors need to wrap their heads around. Investors need to wrap their heads around how small an asset class it is and how it has been efficacious, hate to use those big words, but efficacious over time as a savings and investment product. And it doesn't mean that you have to return to a gold standard. It doesn't mean that we have to go into the Greater Depression. It doesn't mean that we have to have a Holocaust. The only thing that has to happen is that people have to be a little less confident than they are today. Explaining how that would occur would be defaulting to the arithmetic and away from the narrative. And you've answered that question. And gold could do very well. At the very least, it could protect your family's purchasing power, which is what it's designed to do.
Well, I think your point is well taken. As an insurance policy, gold does this job, right? So if the markets are killing it, and we're all making great money in the equities markets, and real estate's booming, and interest rates stay low, and everything's going hunky-dory, then naturally we're going to be feeling pretty good about our situation. But the reality is, having insurance for the case or situation where that doesn't occur is a smart play for any investor.
My belief, everybody needs to default to a different downside. That is the downside associated with $120 trillion of debt at the federal level. People avoid it because people don't want to think about bad things. People say, like smarter people than me don't care about this because the S&P goes up. It does. It goes up until it doesn't go up.
Right.
Our last president said the debt didn't matter because we owe it to each other. Well, that's wrong. The spenders owe it to the savers.
Yeah.
In a democracy, of course, the spenders are more numerous than the savers, and so the spenders always vote to penalize the savers. There's this great libertarian saying that says an election is where 4 coyotes and a lamb vote on the lunch menu. And the savers, who are the lambs, are precisely the people who need to own gold,
right?
As, if you will, coyote insurance.
Fantastic, great point. Why is gold considered an effective hedge in the world today?
History. Gold is unique in that it's a widely accepted medium of exchange, but it's also a store of value. It isn't fiat. It can't be created with a keystroke.
Right.
It isn't a promise to pay. It's simply payment. You want a short answer, but I'm going to give you a long answer. The customer base at Sprott that I don't have to educate about gold are historically, as an example, Jewish people whose parents experienced Auschwitz. They're Vietnamese boat people. They're Palestinians.
Rick, one of the things we've talked about is in different cultures around the world, they treat gold differently. The amount that they consume per GDP is a lot different than the U.S. Any additional views on that?
Well, first of all, when you talk about the efficacy of gold, the fact is that it has evolved as a medium of exchange and a store of value in different cultures at different times, is interesting. It evolved in South Asia, in East Asia, in Africa, in Mesoamerica, and in Europe. The appeal of gold is, in fact, universal. It's beautiful, it's malleable, it's divisible, it's indestructible. Aristotle talked about why it became money. You don't require Sprott in order to tell you about that. But I think the differences of appeal in gold in different markets around the world has to do with the needs and the means. As an example, I have a good friend still, a client, who escaped from Vietnam on a boat. And he told me that at one point in time there were people in Vietnam who believed in gold and people who didn't. And he said you could segregate them because those who did believe in gold got out. He said now all Vietnamese believe in gold. His lesson with regards to gold was certainly more stark than anything that I hope that you or I ever endure. But when we talk about the uses of gold and the differences in attitude towards both gold and silver around the world, it has a lot to do with individual circumstances. Of course, through South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, gold has traditionally been a form of savings. One of my Indian employees, when I asked him about that, said, well, we have much longer experience with government than you people do. We have never assumed in India that the government is our friend, ever. And we didn't trust pounds, sterling, and we don't trust rupiah. The truth is, in India, if you're wealthy, you store your wealth in gold, and if you're not wealthy, you store your wealth in silver. You and I, mercifully, haven't had circumstances in our life where our responses to our investments had to be that stark.
Right, and I think one of the things I've even seen more recently is currency fluctuations and individuals finding that their own country currency is not worth 3 days later anywhere near what it was worth 3 days prior, and that holding something in an asset like gold, a storage of value, if you will, has also become more real for people with currencies that are fluctuating so dramatically.
I think that's true. For the last 30 years, the store of value for people in other currencies has been the US dollar. It's interesting to see gold do well, not merely in pesos or in rupiah, but also in U.S. dollars. The fact is that I suspect that gold is beginning to, and when I say gold, I mean it as a euphemism for precious metals, that gold, and I'm not saying it's going to supplant the U.S. dollar, but I think it's interesting to see it accompany the U.S. dollar during a period of time of U.S. dollar strength.
Well, I've even seen the last year, many central banks have started to diversify away from the U.S. dollar and into metals. As a matter of fact, I think the consumption of world banks in the last 12 to 18 months is at levels not seen in 7 or 8 years. And a lot of people attest that to diversifying away from a dependency on the U.S. And the dollars more specifically. Any thoughts on that?
I think it may also have to do with the extraterritorial sense of the U.S. government. The U.S. government has begun to use its currency as a weapon to enforce its will on people in other places. And some of those people in some of those other places, Russia, China, India, Iran, but also some less challenging places, have come to decide that they'd rather run their own countries than have the president or Congress run those countries. And their ability to do it when we control the world's reserve currency has given them no choice. It's interesting when you say that. Sprott has an Asian parastatal that is a client, and I won't go deeper than that. But I noticed that among their investment holdings was a very, very, very large holding in U.S. Treasuries. And I said, so this holding of U.S. Treasuries suggests that you trust us. And he said, you know, not really. It's just that we trust you more than we trust each other. And as the U.S. becomes seen around the world as being less trustworthy, as we do less to solidify the franchise of the U.S. dollar as being an impartial medium of exchange, what we do as a country inadvertently is that we promote a more stable medium of exchange, which is gold.
Well, and one of the things I've even been reading more about is it's not just our economy and the dollar and our debt. It's also geopolitical events and trading events and other influences that drive the price of gold. Any thoughts on that?
I disagree with that. I think that people use geopolitical events as an excuse to do something that they would otherwise do.
Interesting.
In my experience, moves in precious metals have to do with faith or lack of faith in fiat currencies and government securities. I think that the strength that you're seeing, the relative strength that you're seeing right now in precious metals, has to do with a decreasing amount of faith, still strong faith, but a decreasing amount of faith in both the U.S. dollar and, importantly, the U.S. 10-year Treasury. I think when you see geopolitical events, as an example, the recent assassination by the U.S. of the Iranian general, you see a reflexive move in gold, but the move seems to be over in 72 hours. Right. When you see a circumstance that gives you pause with regards to the U.S. economy, or the deficit, I think you see a very different and more thoroughgoing response in precious metals markets. That's
an interesting view. You know, I know, reading many analysts, a lot of the banks, a lot of people who try to predict the price of metal wouldn't 100% agree with some of the points you made, but that's the beauty of an analyst, right? Is everyone has a view, and you have to take what you think is what drives the price and what is important to you when you make your decision, right?
I tend to have an agnostic view. My view is really shaped simply by my time on Earth and in the gold market. Yeah. It isn't anything that I came upon empirically. It's something that I came upon because I lived it and read it.
Yeah, it seems like even a more analytical view sometimes too of just it's how it's performed in the past as well, right? All right, good. Well, Rick, thanks for coming in today. We do appreciate your time and all your insights.
Thank you for the conversation, and thank you for the wonderful tour of your facilities.